I have told this story exactly once before, to the Vaughan High Chronicler, in a formal deposition recorded on sealed crystal and stored in the vault beneath the Restoration Court. That account was accurate in every verifiable particular, and said almost nothing that mattered. This is the version I have not given to anyone. I am giving it now because I am old enough not to care what the chronicler thinks, and because the man it concerns deserves to have it told in plain language before I die. His name was Bren Akaffer. He was a human. He was a medic attached to a joint humanitarian detail operating out of the collapsed transit infrastructure at Threshold Station Merv, on the outer edge of what had been Vaughan-held space before the Keth fleet reduced the station's upper 3 halls to open sky. I was, at the time, the last living member of the Vaughan Imperial Line. I was also a refugee in a ruin, bleeding from a piece of shrapnel lodged 2 fingers below my left shoulder blade, pretending to be nobody. Those 2 facts, what I was, and what I was pretending to be, are the whole architecture of the night I am about to describe. Everything else is Bren Akaffer. The bombardment had come 3 days before I found myself in Outer Hall 6. I had been on Merv to observe a diplomatic transit in secret, no attendants, no insignia, traveling under a courtesy alias as a minor logistics administrator. The alias saved my life. When the Keth opened their orbital suppression barrage, they targeted the upper docking rings and the administrative core, where they correctly believed the senior Vaughan military command had established a forward node. They were not wrong. The command was there. It was destroyed in the first pass. I was in a ground-level passenger hall when the first impact hit. The concussive wave knocked me off a bench and into a support column, and I remember lying on the floor watching the ceiling do something it was not designed to do, and thinking with considerable clarity that I needed to move immediately. I moved. I moved through 4 halls and a maintenance corridor, and a gap in an exterior wall that something large had made recently, and I came out on the station's windward face, where the air smelled of scorched metal and something organic I did not examine closely, and the sky was the particular greenish-black that Keth suppression weapons leave in an atmosphere for hours after deployment. I found a group of civilians in the wreckage of a ground transport depot. I joined them. I did not speak. My Vaughan Imperial insignia, a subtle thing, a banded collar with specific frequency markers woven into the metal, I had removed in the maintenance corridor and put inside my left boot, where it has remained a mystery to historians ever since, because it was never recovered. The shrapnel found me on the 2nd day, when a Keth patrol drone passed low over our depot and one of the civilians panicked and ran, and the drone's perimeter denial system responded. I was not the target. The shrapnel was indiscriminate. It was a small piece. I knew this because I could still walk and because the pain, while serious, was not the consuming white kind that means something vital has been reached. It was the grinding, constant, slowly worsening kind that means infection is coming if nothing is done, and blood loss is accumulating, and the body is beginning to make calculations it will eventually lose. By the 3rd day, I had moved twice more, following the civilian group as they followed rumors of a humanitarian corridor. We ended in Outer Hall 6, which had half a roof, 1 intact wall, 17 other people, a cache of emergency rations someone had dragged in from a supply locker, and no medical supplies of any kind. That was the situation when Bren Akaffer came through the broken east access with his kid on his back and a small chemical light in his hand, and looked around the hall with the expression of a man assessing a problem he intends to solve. He was not a large man. This surprised me, I admit. Humans often read as larger in text than in person, and the accounts I had encountered of human field medics had a certain mythologizing quality. He was medium height, compact through the shoulders, and his face was the deep weathered brown of someone who has spent a great deal of his life outdoors in difficult conditions. He had perhaps 38 years on him, perhaps a few more. His hands, I noticed immediately, were very still, not the stillness of someone suppressing movement, the stillness of someone who had made peace with exactly what his hands were for. He had a small unit patch on his left sleeve, the sigil of some humanitarian organization I did not recognize, and no rank insignia I could identify and no weapons visible, though I assumed, correctly, that he had a sidearm somewhere on his person. What he had that was visible was the kit, which was substantial, and the light, which he immediately attached to a wall bracket so it illuminated the hall without blinding anyone, and a collapsible water filtration system which he assembled in approximately 2 minutes and attached to a standing pipe in the corner without asking anyone's permission, simply doing it because it needed to be done. He said something in a language I did not know, one of the Keth-adjacent border Creoles, I believe, though I have never been certain, and 2 of the civilians understood and responded, and a short exchange occurred which resulted in him beginning to move through the group, checking people methodically. He had a portable diagnostic scanner. It was old, the casing scuffed and repaired in 2 places with different colored sealant. He used it without drama, glancing at its readout, speaking quietly, passing small items from the kit to those who needed them. I watched him work for approximately 20 minutes before he reached me, and watching him was instructive in a way I had not anticipated. He did not triage by appearance. A standard humanitarian protocol sequences by visible injury severity, the most obviously hurt first, the ambulatory cases last. He did not use that protocol, or rather, he used it as a starting point and then deviated from it in ways that were clearly intentional. He spent 6 minutes with a Wreath child whose injuries were superficially minor, a small cut on the forehead already coagulating well, because the child was very still in a way that children who are only physically injured are not. He spoke to the child for a long time quietly, and at the end of it produced a small protein bar from the kit and put it in the child's hands, and the child's stillness changed quality. It became the stillness of someone who has been acknowledged rather than the stillness of someone who has decided not to be present. He spent 3 minutes with an older Vaughn male whose leg wound was clearly the most serious injury in the hall, cleaning and packing it with the efficiency of someone who has done this many times, explaining everything before he did it, not asking for permission but giving information. Here is what this will feel like. Here is what it means. Here is what you need to do, in the register of someone who believes that information reduces fear and fear makes bodies harder to treat. He was correct about that, as he was correct about most things. He reached me last. I had positioned myself against the intact wall in a corner, which was tactically sound from several perspectives, and I had kept my posture as closed and unremarkable as I could manage, which was somewhat undermined by the fact that I was very clearly in pain and had been for 2 days. He crouched in front of me, not beside me, in front, so I could see his face and his hands both. I noted that. He said something in the border Creole. I did not respond. He switched to standard Galactic Common, which I speak fluently and which I had not used since the bombardment, because speaking fluently is a class marker in a refugee group. I'm a medic, he said, attached to the Mayor of Humanitarian Corridor. I'm not military, I'm not affiliated with any fleet, and I have no interest in anything except making sure you're still breathing tomorrow. Can I look at whatever's hurting you? I said in careful, slightly rough Galactic Common, the kind a logistics administrator might speak. I am fine. He looked at me for a moment. His eyes were very dark and they had the quality that I have since come to associate specifically with him, a complete absence of performance. He was not performing patience. He was not performing sympathy. He was simply looking at me, taking in information, in the way that I imagine he looked at every problem that came in front of him. You've been holding your left side for the last 10 minutes, he said. Your breathing is shallow and it catches on the exhale. That's either a fractured rib or something embedded. Neither one gets better by itself in conditions like these. He paused. You don't have to tell me anything about yourself. I don't need to know your name or your origin point or what you were doing here. I just need to know where it hurts. I looked at him for a long moment. He waited. He was extremely good at waiting. Below the shoulder blade, I said. Left side, 2 days. Okay, he said, the same way someone says it when they are writing something down in their mind. Okay, can I take a look? What followed was thoroughly undramatic. He examined the wound with the scanner and then by touch with gloves, explaining what he was doing as he did it in the same quiet register he used for everything. And he told me what he found, a small triangular fragment, non-reactive metal, approximately 8 millimeters, sitting against the muscle wall and not having migrated, which he said was good. And he told me what he was going to do, which was remove it, sterilize the area, seal it, and give me a course of antibiotic blocks that I would need to complete over the following 5 days. He said all of this before he did any of it, which I also noted. The removal was painful. He warned me that it would be, and he was accurate about the degree. He did not tell me to be quiet or to be still or to breathe in any particular pattern. He just worked, and when I made a sound involuntarily, he said almost without stopping, and it was almost, and then it was done. Clean entry, clean exit, nothing complicated, he said, sealing the site. You were lucky. Yes, I said. It was the first time in 3 days that I had said something I meant without qualification. He gave me the antibiotic blocks, explained the dosing schedule, and began to stand. Then the perimeter alarm went off. It was not a formal alarm. There was no functioning infrastructure left to produce one. But the civilians near the hall's east access suddenly moved back in a collective instinctive motion, and the two who had spoken with him grabbed their belongings, and the unmistakable distant sound of Keth tactical movement, a low thrumming that travels through the ground before it travels through the air, became audible. He was on his feet in one motion. He went to the east access, looked out for perhaps 4 seconds, and came back. The corridor they were holding on the north face has collapsed, he said to the group in Galactic Common, and then in the border Creole. The Keth have come around the perimeter. There is an egress point on the south face, structural gap in the wall, approximately 150 meters. I can get most of you there. Most of you, not all. He was already looking at me when he said it. You can't move that distance at that pace, he said to me, not as an accusation, as a fact. The seal is holding, but the muscle is compromised. If you run 150 meters over broken ground, you'll reopen it. Then I will walk, I said. Not at the speed the situation requires. He looked at the group. He made a decision I could see him make. He turned to the 2 civilians who had been acting as informal group organizers and gave them specific instructions. The gap, the bearing, the signal frequency for the humanitarian corridor on the other side, with the efficient specificity of someone who has briefed people in poor conditions before. He got them moving. He was very good at that too. Within 2 minutes, 15 people were filing toward the south face in an orderly and quiet way that spoke well of his instruction and of their own reserves of composure. He came back to me. My unit's fallback point is north, he said. I have a window of about 40 minutes to reach it. Then you should go, I said. Yeah, he said. He sat down against the wall beside me, set his kit between us, and turned off the room light so the hall was dark. Hand me that ration pack, would you? The square one. I looked at him. The fallback point, I said. 40 minutes was an optimistic estimate, he said. It's probably 30 now. Not enough time to do anything useful, and moving through that corridor in the dark with Keth tactical active is not a calculation I like. Better to stay low and quiet and let them pass the perimeter sweep. He found the ration pack himself in the dark. His hands knew where things were in the kit without consulting his eyes. Are you cold? I was cold. I had been cold for 2 days, and I had not said so because it was not information that helped anything. Yes, I said. He produced a thermal sheet from the kit, the thin mylar kind, and passed it to me without ceremony. Then he opened the ration pack and broke it in half and gave me the larger half, and that was the end of the discussion about the fallback point. We sat in the dark and ate in silence for a while. He was the first one to speak, and what he said was not what I expected. "What's that sound the station makes?" he said. "The low resonance. I've been here 3 days and I can't figure out if it's a structural thing or a mechanical thing." I listened. I knew the sound. Every Vaughn station of this design made it, a harmonic produced by the interaction of the station's gravity plating with the specific alloy used in the primary support lattice. It was, in fact, a structural thing. I knew this because I had reviewed the original Vaughn Engineering Corps specification documents for the Merv-class station, designed approximately 11 years ago, when I was reviewing a proposed upgrade program for the border infrastructure. I did not say any of that. "Structural," I said, "the support lattice." He said, in the way someone says it when they find that genuinely satisfying. "I thought so. The resonance has too much geometry to be mechanical." I looked at the darkness where he was, because that was an unusual observation. "You have engineering training," I said. "No," he said, "I just listened to things." A pause. "Grew up near a river, big one." When you grow up near something that makes a lot of noise, you start to hear the difference between noises that have structure and noises that are just random. The river had geometry. This has geometry. I thought about that for a moment. It was the kind of observation that a certain kind of mind makes, not educated in the formal sense, but organized in a way that formal education only sometimes produces. "Where was the river?" I said. I do not know entirely why I asked. I was cold and in pain and in a dark ruin with Keth tactical units moving somewhere outside, and the sensible thing was to be as small and quiet and unrevealing as possible. But he had said something that sounded like a real place, and I had spent 3 days surrounded by people who were very carefully not saying anything real. "Nigeria," he said, "West Africa, Earth." He said it the way people say the names of places that are simply where they are from without decoration. "Niger Delta country. My grandmother lived on the water. I spent summers there when I was young." "And then you became a medic," I said. "Not directly." There was a quality in his voice in the darkness that I can only describe as amiable, not cheerful. Amiable, which is different, which is warmth without performance. I was going to be an engineer. I was good at math. Then there was a flood, bad one, when I was about 17, and the response teams came in, and I ended up spending 3 weeks attached to one of the medical units just doing whatever they needed done. Logistics mostly. Hauling. At the end of it, the senior medic asked me if I wanted to learn the other part. He paused. I did. "You traded mathematics for this," I said, with a gesture at the darkness and the ruin that he probably could not see. "I use mathematics every day," he said. "Dosing calculations, scanner interpretation, trajectory estimation for triage sequencing." Another pause. The engineer version of me would have spent his life building things that didn't involve people who were hurt. I think I made the right trade. Outside, the ground thrum of the Keth patrol intensified for a long moment, and then began to recede. Neither of us spoke during it. When it was clearly moving away, I let a breath out. "How long have you been doing this?" I asked. It was not a question I had planned to ask. "Field humanitarian work, 12 years. Started on Earth, moved to the Joint Human Galactic Deployment when the treaty opened the framework. Been on Merv for 8 months. This corridor was actually functional 8 months ago. Proper relief station, 2 medical bays, staff of 12. He stopped. "The Keth didn't give notice of the bombardment." "No," I said, "they did not." There was a particular flatness to the way I said it that I was aware of even as I said it. The bombardment had been, among other things, a policy decision, one made by the Keth High Command in the deliberate belief that eliminating the Vaughn Forward Command at Merv would accelerate the territorial negotiation in their favor. From the position I occupied, before it became necessary to strip my insignia and pretend to be nobody, I had read the intelligence assessments that predicted exactly that calculation. I had not been able to prevent it. The relief station he described, 2 medical bays, staff of 12, was one of 47 civilian humanitarian infrastructure nodes that the bombardment had compromised or destroyed in the Merv sector. I had the number precisely because I had been reviewing the sector humanitarian network 3 weeks before as part of an imperial welfare audit. I had noted several concerns about its resilience. I had generated a memo. The memo was, presumably, in the administrative core of Merv Station, which was no longer intact. I did not say any of that. "I'm sorry about your colleague," I said instead, "the one in the upper hall." He was quiet for a moment. "Tem," he said. "Her name was Tem. She was Wreath, which is unusual in our unit. Most of the Wreath deployments go to the inner system corridors. She came out to the border because she said the need was greater and she had more useful skills than she was using in the inner system." A pause. "She was right about that." "She was right about most things." "Did she have family?" "A daughter, grown. I've written the letter." He said it as though letter writing was a physical thing he had carried for some time and set down somewhere. "That is hard work," I said. "Yes," he said, and then, after a moment, "She would have said it was the most important work, that the people who come after need to know what the person was, who they actually were, not just the fact of their absence." He paused. "I'm still working on getting that right." The silence between us had a different quality than the silence at the beginning. The first silence had been mutual wariness, 2 strangers in a dangerous place keeping their edges up. This silence had edges too, but they were facing outward, not at each other. "Are you from Vaughn Space originally?" he said. It was a careful question. He was asking something he suspected and offering me the chance to answer as much or as little as I chose. "Yes," I said. "High Corps or border?" "High Corps," I said. He made a small sound of acknowledgement. In the galactic common that humans had adopted, that sound meant, "I hear you, I am not pressing, I file this gently." "High Corps Vaughn ends up at Merv for one of 2 reasons," he said. "Military logistics or diplomatic work. Logistics administrators don't usually travel alone." I said nothing. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "I mean that. I'm not trying to extract anything from you. It's a long night, and the only way I know how to get through a long night is to keep talking." "Why?" I said. He considered it. "When I was in training, my instructor said that a patient who is talking is a patient who is conscious, and a patient who is conscious is a patient who is fighting." She was talking about literal patients in acute situations, but I think it applies more broadly. A pause. "I also think it's true for the medic. If I'm talking, I'm present. If I'm present, I'm useful. If I'm useful, the night is shorter." I sat with that for a moment. The thermal sheet crinkled when I moved, and I moved carefully. "That is a philosophy," I said. "It's a coping mechanism," he said, with a quality in his voice that was self-aware without being self-deprecating. "I've been here long enough not to dress it up." The night deepened, the temperature dropped. Outside, the sounds of the Keth perimeter settled into a pattern, not close, not retreating, simply present, which was its own particular kind of pressure. The hall's half-roof let in a stripe of the night sky, greenish-black, clearing slowly toward the dark, ordinary kind. We talked. I do not know how to account for it entirely. I had spent 3 days in rigorous concealment of my identity, my rank, my intentions, and in a broader sense my whole self, because concealment had been necessary and I am trained for it. The training held. I did not say anything I should not have said. I did not volunteer my name or my title or the specific nature of my presence on Merv. I talked around those things with the competence that a certain level of education and a certain number of difficult years produces. But I talked. He talked too, and the thing about Bren Akaffer's conversation, which I understood only gradually across those hours, was that it had no agenda. He was not building towards something. He was not gathering intelligence. I was alert to that, and there was nothing of it. He was not performing compassion for a civilian he found pitiable. He was simply talking, the way the river had talked, the way he had told me the river talked, with geometry, with structure, with a sound that had meaning underneath the sound. He talked about the work, about the particular difficulty of maintaining medical supply chains in active conflict zones, which is a logistical problem of considerable complexity, and which he described in terms that told me he thought about logistics the way an engineer thinks about load-bearing structures, as a problem with a right answer that you are always approaching and never quite reaching. He talked about the other medics in his unit with the fond irritability of someone who has worked closely with people for a long time and knows their failures and does not hold them. He talked, briefly and with great carefulness, about a colleague who had been in the upper hall when the bombardment came and who had not been recovered, and I did not press him on it, and he did not elaborate. He talked about Earth a little, about the river more than once, returning to it the way people return to things that formed them, about his grandmother, who had been a teacher and who had made him memorize poetry in 3 languages on the grounds that a person who could hold 3 languages in their head had more room in it than a person who could hold 1. About the specific quality of light on water in the early morning in the Delta, which he described with the careful, precise vocabulary of someone who has thought about it a great deal and knows that language is not quite adequate and tries anyway. I found myself thinking about the Vaughan Imperial Library, where I had spent a considerable portion of my education, and where there were 3 windows that faced east, and the quality of light through those windows in the early morning on clear days was not like what he described. The light of Earth in a river delta is not the light of a Vaughan high-core world, but related to it in some way I cannot fully articulate. Both of them were light that arrived before anyone had decided what the day was going to be. I told him this, not about the library, about the light. "That's it," he said, with a directness of recognition that surprised me. "That's exactly the quality, before the day decides." "Yes," I said. We were quiet for a while. "You're from somewhere specific," he said, and it was not a question. "Not just high-core Vaughan, somewhere particular with windows." "Yes," I said. "That's enough," he said, not pressing, just locating me so that I was a person in a specific place rather than a refugee in a ruin, and he could see me better that way. The Keth patrol passed closer again around the 3rd hour. We heard it before we saw anything, the ground thrum rising, and then the specific clicking that the Keth use for short-range tactical communication, and then the light of their scanners moving across the broken exterior wall in 3 distinct sweeps. We were in the deepest part of the hall's shadow. He had positioned us there, I realized, without announcing it, when we first sat down. He had put us where the light wouldn't find us. We did not move, we did not speak. His hand during the scanner sweeps came to rest near mine on the floor, not on mine, near it, as though he was establishing a location. Here I am here, the way you mark a point on a map. The scanners swept past and the light went with them, and the ground thrum receded again. Neither of us commented on any of it. He simply moved his hand back to the kit, checked something in it by feel, and said, in a normal, quiet voice, "The antibiotic block I gave you, you'll need to take the second one in about 2 hours. I'll remind you." "Thank you," I said. Around the 4th hour, I asked him something I had been calculating for some time. "You said the fallback window was 30 to 40 minutes, I said. "That was some time ago." "Yes," he said. "Is there another window?" He was quiet for a moment. "There's a relief column scheduled for dawn," he said. "If it's on schedule, it comes through the north access at first light, It's a larger force than my unit, multi-species humanitarian with a military escort. They'll have the perimeter situation to handle first, but once they've got it, this area gets swept. And if it is not on schedule, I said, then we wait for the next one. He said this without heaviness. Relief columns are late. It's a rule. I've been doing this 12 years and I have never had one be early. But they arrive, I said. They arrive, he said. There was something in his certainty about that. It was not the certainty of someone who has never been disappointed. His voice had too much weathering in it for that. It was the certainty of someone who has been disappointed many times and has chosen, deliberately, to believe in the column arriving anyway. A chosen certainty, which is harder and worth more. Why do you keep doing this? I said. 12 years, conditions like this, you could build things. I do build things, he said, just not the kind you keep. A pause. My grandmother used to say that you can tell what a person is by what they go back to when they have a choice. Every time I've had a choice, I've gone back to this. That's probably the whole answer. Is it not a cost? I said. 12 years of this. I did not have a precise word for what I meant. The darkness, the cold, the ruin. The letter he still had to get right. Everything is a cost, he said. The question is what you're buying. He thought about it for a moment, and I had the impression that this was not a question he had been asked before in quite this form, or at least not by someone he expected to hear the honest version. When I was young, I thought the cost was the things you gave up, the other life, the easier work, the staying home. Now I think the cost is simpler. The cost is paying attention to every person in every hall, in every ruin. You can't do this work at a distance. You have to be present to it every time or you start making errors that people pay for. A pause. That is the actual cost, not the hardship, the attention. I thought about that. There are people in positions like mine who develop a facility for appearing to pay attention, while actually managing a quantity of information too large for genuine presence to every individual thing. It is a necessary skill and an honest one. An empress who is genuinely present to every detail of every corridor under her administration would be paralyzed within a week. The management of scope is part of the work. But there is also a kind that develops the appearance of attention as a substitute for the thing itself. And that is a different and more dangerous condition, and one I had spent 11 years watching for in myself, with the particular vigilance that comes from knowing a thing is possible and not wanting to become it. He was the other kind entirely. He had no capacity for managed attention that I could detect. He was, in every conversation, in every interaction I had observed since he came through the East Access, simply present. It was not a technique. It was, as nearly as I could determine, structural. I thought about what I went back to when I had a choice. The list was shorter than I would have liked and more complicated than I could explain in a dark hall to a man who had spent 12 years building things you don't keep. I did not attempt it, but I thought about it, which is something I had not done in some time. Around the 5th hour, the wound stiffened badly. It does that in the cold. The sealed muscle locks up, and the pain shifts from the grinding kind to the deep aching kind that makes the whole side of the body feel wrong. I was reasonably good at not showing it. He noticed anyway. The seal is doing what it's supposed to, he said, not looking at me. He was looking at the strip of sky through the roof. The stiffness is normal. It means the tissue is responding. It will be worse for 2 or 3 days and then better. I know, I said, and then, because that was the wrong register for a logistics administrator. Thank you for explaining. He glanced at me briefly. The darkness made his expression difficult to read, but there was something in it, not suspicion, something more considered. You've been treated before, he said. Field treatment. It was not a question. Once, I said, a long time ago. He nodded, accepting this as he accepted everything, and went back to watching the sky. There's a star, he said after a moment, that comes up over the east edge about an hour before dawn. I don't know its Vaughn designation. From Earth, it's part of a constellation my grandmother showed me once. She had a chart. Very old chart paper. The constellation has a name in an old language that means the herdsman. I looked at the strip of sky. I knew which star he meant. In the Vaughn designation system, it carries a catalog number and a secondary name in the old imperial astronomical language, a language that very few people still read, and that I had been made to study as a child, with considerable resistance on my part and considerable persistence on my tutors. The secondary name in the old language means something closer to the one who watches the road. In the old Vaughn astronomical naming, I said, it means the one who watches the road. He was quiet for a moment. That's better than herdsman, he said. I have always thought so, I said. We watched the star together for a while. At some point during the 6th hour, I became aware that I had stopped monitoring what I said with the same vigilance I had maintained for 3 days. Not stopped entirely, the essential things, my name, my title, the specific circumstances of my presence on Merv, remained withheld, but the quality of my attention had changed. I had been a person behind glass for 3 days, and the glass had not come down, but it had become, somewhere in the long dark, a different kind of barrier, one I was aware of and could see through and had chosen for now to keep in place. That is the closest I can come to describing what it means to be seen by someone without being identified. It is an unusual state. I have been identified many times by rank, by title, by the particular combination of bearing and vocabulary that an imperial education produces whether you intend it to or not. I had been seen, in the full sense, considerably less often. The two things are not the same, and most people, in my experience, do not distinguish between them. He gave me the second antibiotic block at the correct time, 2 hours after the first, without my having to ask. He did it the same way he did everything, without announcement, simply reaching into the kit and passing it to me. I took it. He noted something on a small physical log he kept in the kit, a paper one, folded and much written on. You keep a paper log, I said. Electronic systems fail, he said. Paper is slower to fail. And when it fails? I remember, he said. I have a good memory for patients. What do you write down? Treatments, times, observations, anything I'll need to relay to the next medic or the receiving facility. A pause. And whatever seems important. Not medically, just important. What have you written about tonight? He was quiet for a moment. That the station makes a structural resonance that has geometry, he said. That there's a star on the east edge that watches the road. That I'm sitting with a high-core Vaughn with field treatment experience and a very precise way of talking about light. He paused again. And that the relief column is going to be on time. Something happened in my chest when he said that. Not because of what it implied about his observations, though that was considerable, but because of the last line, which he added to the rest of it without a change in tone, as though the column arriving on time was as much a fact of the night as the resonance of the lattice and the name of the star. He had made a record of his certainty. He had written it down. I looked at him in the darkness. You cannot know that, I said. No, he said, I'm writing it anyway. The 7th hour was the hardest. The cold came in fully. The Merv border nights are brutal, and the thermal sheet was not designed for extended exposure at this temperature. My wound had settled from stiffness into a kind of numb pressure that I knew would return to pain when I warmed again. I was aware of the slow calculation my body was making about its resources, and I was aware that the calculation had a margin, and I was still within it, but the margin was thinner than it had been at the beginning of the night. He moved at some point in the 7th hour, so that he was beside me rather than separated by the kit. He did not ask. He simply moved and put the kit in front of us so it served as a partial windbreak, and the small shared warmth of proximity is a real thing, not a sentimental one, and my body registered it as useful. Talk, he said. About what? Anything, the windows, the light, whatever you want. I talked. I talked about light, because he had asked, and because I had been thinking about it. I talked about the way that certain kinds of architecture are built to direct light in specific ways, how the Great Hall of the Vaughan Imperial Library had been designed, by the architect who built it in the 3rd century of the restored empire, to fill with gold light in the morning so that the scholars working there were never cold in their first hour. I talked about this without saying it was the Imperial Library. I said it was a library in a high-core city, a very old building, and if he heard the specific shape of what I was not saying, he gave no sign of it. He listened the way he did everything, completely. The architect knew something, he said when I paused. She knew that people do better work when they are warm, I said. She said so in her notes on the design. It is quite practical reasoning in a building usually described in terms of its beauty. The best beautiful things are also practical, he said. I thought about whether that was true. I thought about the formal gardens of the imperial residence, which were beautiful and not especially practical. I thought about the structure of the Vaughan Treaty Protocols, which were designed to be beautiful in their symmetry, and which were also, when they functioned, genuinely effective. I thought about the way he had positioned us in the shadow, which was practical, and the way he had noted the star's name in the old language alongside his certainty about the column arriving, which was perhaps also practical, in a way I was only beginning to understand. Sometimes, I said. He made the amiable sound, fair. Dawn came the way he had said it would. The star first, just ahead of the light, watching the road, and then the sky shifting from its night color through a gray that was neither dark nor light, a transitional color, the color of a decision not yet made. The relief column was 40 minutes late. He had been right about that too. We heard it before we saw it, a different ground thrum from the Keth kind, heavier and more organized, and then the specific communication frequencies of a multi-species humanitarian escort, and then the voices, low and purposeful, coming through the north access. He was on his feet before I was. He helped me up, a hand under my right arm, not the left, which told me he remembered exactly where the wound was even in the dark, without being told, and he raised his other hand in the signal pattern the column would recognize, and the leading element of the column, a mixed human wreath medic team, came into the hall with lights. There was a sequence that followed. I know it in outline. He spoke to the lead medic, gave a thorough handover on my treatment, passed the paper log for their review, answered questions. The hall was assessed. A perimeter was established. People were moved. At some point in this sequence, a member of the military escorts officer staff, a Vaughan, a young adjutant I recognized distantly but who clearly did not recognize me, conducted a routine identification sweep of the civilians in the hall, as protocol required. The sweep was thorough. When it reached me, the scanner caught something. The adjutant looked at his readout, looked at me, and his face performed a sequence of expressions I have seen before on the faces of young people who have just understood something they were not prepared for. He said my name, my true name and my title, in a hall now full of people. There was a silence. I looked at him steadily until he recovered enough presence of mind to render the appropriate formal acknowledgement, which he did, somewhat mechanically. I was aware, in the particular way one is aware of things in one's peripheral vision that one is not ready to look at directly, that Bren Akaffer had gone very still. I turned to look at him. It seemed important that I do it rather than wait for him to do it. He was looking at me. His face was doing something more complicated than the adjutant's face had done, not shock, because I thought he had understood a considerable amount over the course of the night, not embarrassment, not calculation, something more like recalibration. A man adjusting a measurement he had already made, not because the thing he measured had changed, but because a new coordinate had arrived and needed to be fitted to what he already knew. He was still holding his kit. His hands were still. Akefir, I said. Yes, he said. I had been thinking in some portion of my mind for some hours about what I would say at this moment, if it came. The training suggests several appropriate registers for a disclosure of this kind, the formal, the gracious, the deflective. I had all of them ready. I said none of them. My name is Raisha Vaughn, I said. Before tonight, I had not told it to anyone in 3 days. I want you to know that I told it to you because you asked me the right things. He was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the hall was moving, the medic team working, the escort establishing the perimeter, the adjutant speaking urgently into a communicator. All of it was very loud and very busy and strangely far away. You didn't tell me your name, he said. No, I said, but you asked me about light. He looked at me, and whatever the recalibration had produced in him when it was done was not distance. It was the same quality his face had held all night, that complete absence of performance. He had looked at me without knowing who I was, and he was looking at me now knowing who I was, and the look was the same look. I have thought about that for many years since, the symmetry of it, that the look did not change when the coordinate changed. That I was not more or less to him on either side of the disclosure. That I was simply the person who had spent the night in the dark with him, talking about geometry and light and a star that watched the road, and who happened, in addition to all of that, to be an empress. I wrote it down, he said, in the log, that the column was going to be on time. You were 40 minutes wrong, I said. In this work, he said, with the amiable quality that was his and no one else's, 40 minutes is on time. I looked at him for a long moment. The adjutant was approaching. The column's senior officer was behind him. The formal world was arriving, as it always does, to reassert its protocols over the informal one, and I would need to step into it in approximately 30 seconds, and I would not see him again, not like this. Not outside the protocols, for what turned out to be several months, until I arranged it. But those 30 seconds were still present. Bren Akefir, I said. Empress, he said, with no particular emphasis, the way he would have said it about anything. Thank you, I said, for not going to the fallback point. He looked at me, and there it was, the thing that had been happening all night, and that I could see clearly now in the morning light, which was arriving in the particular way of the Merv border, cold and gray and then, quickly, gold. He had stayed. He had not stayed because he knew who I was. He had stayed because leaving was not what he did, not in dark halls, not with someone whose breathing caught on the exhale. I had a good view of the star from here, he said. Then the adjutant arrived, and the formal world came with him, and I stepped into it. The relief column commander secured the hall and the surrounding perimeter within 2 hours. By mid-morning, I had been moved to the column's medical facility, examined by 3 separate doctors, and subjected to the beginning of what became a prolonged and not entirely comfortable process of reestablishing the imperial administrative apparatus in the aftermath of what the Keth bombardment had done to the upper halls and the forward command. I will not detail that process here. It is in the chronicler's account in full, and it is accurate in all its particulars. The losses were significant. The reconstruction was longer and more difficult than the initial projections estimated, which is true of all reconstructions. The Keth territorial negotiation continued for 14 months following the bombardment and concluded, in the end, without the concessions they had been seeking, which I mention not with any particular satisfaction, but as a matter of record. What the chronicler's account does not contain is this. Bren Akefir submitted his handover documentation to the column's medical command and joined his unit's surviving personnel at the humanitarian corridor on the north face. He was, from that point, part of the official record only in the way that a specific medic working a humanitarian corridor is part of an official record, which is to say, logged, documented, administratively present and invisible in the way that people who do that work are always invisible. He should not have been invisible. The people who keep working through the night in the ruins after the bombardment, who stay when the fallback window closes, who keep talking so the patient keeps fighting, these are not incidental figures in the record. They are the record, if the record is honest. The bureaucratic structure that surrounds the formal events of an emergency, the command decisions, the fleet dispositions, the diplomatic aftermath, exists, in the end, to create conditions in which a person like Bren Akhafer can do what he does. When the structure has forgotten that, it has forgotten its purpose. I made him visible. This required some persistence and some navigation of protocols that were not designed with this situation in mind, and the assistance of two people in the administrative apparatus who were capable enough not to ask unnecessary questions. But I had been an empress for 11 years at that point, and an empress for 11 years understands how to make things happen that are not on the standard list of things that happen. There was also the question of how to make him visible without making him a story, without transforming the night in Outer Hall 6 into a court legend, the kind that accumulates additional detail with each retelling until the actual event is entirely obscured. He would not have wanted that. I knew this without asking him, in the way you know things about people who have shown you all their actual machinery in a single long dark night. He would have wanted the record to be accurate and then to go back to work, which is what he did. 4 months later, he was formally recognized by the Vaughan Restoration Court for service in the field during the Merv emergency. The recognition is a standard humanitarian citation, and I gave it to him in a public ceremony, and the ceremony is documented. And if you read the documentation, you will find a precise and accurate accounting of the citation and a photograph in which he is wearing a clean version of his unit uniform, and I am wearing the formal imperial presentation dress, and we are both looking at the citation plaque, and our expressions are appropriate to the occasion. What the photograph does not show is what happened before the ceremony began, when he arrived at the anteroom, and I was already there, and we stood on opposite sides of a very formal room and looked at each other in a way that was, for both of us, a recognition of something that the formal world does not have a protocol for. He said, the column was only 40 minutes late. I said, you were right. He said, I wrote it down. I said, I know, I have the page. I do have the page. He gave it to me at the ceremony, between the formal proceedings and the reception, folded, as all the pages in that log were folded, worn along the crease from being kept in a kit through difficult conditions. On it, in handwriting that is precise and slightly angular, the way the handwriting of someone who learned to write carefully in difficult conditions tends to be, there is a list of the night's treatments and times and observations, and at the bottom, separate from the medical entries, in a box he had drawn with a single ruled line. Star on the east edge, Old Vaughan name, the one who watches the road. Relief column, on time. Below that, written smaller, clearly added at some point after the ceremony or perhaps before it, I have never asked him and he has never told me. There are 2 words that are not in Galactic Common and not in the Border Creole, and not in any language I recognized when I first read them. I looked them up. They are from one of the old languages of the Niger Delta region of West Africa, one of the languages his grandmother spoke, and they mean, approximately, translated across the considerable distance between that language and anything I have words for. Here present. That is the story, not the version in the chronicler's sealed crystal, not the version in the citation documentation. This version, the dark hall, the thermal sheet, the star on the east edge, the 40 minutes, the page in the kit with the 2 words at the bottom. There is a question I have been asked, by the few people who know any part of it, about whether the night in Outer Hall 6 changed anything consequential, whether it altered decisions, shifted the course of the reconstruction, influenced the shape of the Keth negotiation, or the 17 other large formal matters that occupied the years that followed it? The honest answer is, I do not know how to separate it out. I was the same person after as before, with the same information and the same responsibilities and the same appointments to keep. The wound healed in the timeline the medic had predicted, which I noted with a satisfaction I recognized as slightly irrational. The memo about humanitarian infrastructure resilience was reconstructed and resubmitted and eventually, much later, became policy. A matter I mention not because it is connected to Outer Hall 6 in any direct way, but because it is the kind of thing that seems relevant when you are trying to be honest about what a night in a ruin actually produces. What it produced in me was this: the knowledge that there are people who pay full attention, who do not reduce the cost by managing their presence from a distance. I had known this in the abstract, as an empress knows many true things in the abstract. I knew it differently after. He is still a medic. He is older now, considerably, and so am I, and the Delta country he grew up near has changed in the years since, as everything changes. He has not stopped going back to it. Every time there has been a choice, he has gone back to the work, the same as he always has, building things you don't keep, in the places where they need to be built. I have watched the star he showed me every year since, when the season brings it to the east edge before dawn. It is not a famous star. In most catalogs it is only a number. In the old Vaughn astronomical language it watches the road. On a paper page folded in my desk, kept by a man with still hands in a dark hall 3 days after a bombardment, it arrives just ahead of the light. He stayed when the ruin went dark. I told him my name at dawn. That is, after all, the whole of it.